Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
Tonight, President Trump says he's struck a trade deal with Indonesia.
Indonesia is very strong on copper, but we have full access to everything. We will pay no tariffs. So they are giving us access into Indonesia, which we never had. That's probably the biggest part of the deal. And the other part is they are going to pay 19%, and we are going to pay nothing.
We'll have the details, plus a live report from Pittsburgh, where President Trump attended an AI summit today. We'll have an interview from the event with CoreWeave CEO Michael Intrator.
Also tonight, new data signaling President Trump's tariff policies are being passed on to consumers, as the Consumer Price Index showed inflation for toys and home appliances running at the fastest in years. We'll discuss what to expect after the August 1st tariff deadline with Andrew Hale from the Heritage Foundation.
And on Capitol Hill, the House fails to clear a procedural hurdle to advance a series of crypto week bills, while the Senate prepares to move forward on a slightly altered rescissions package. We'll have more with Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota and Republican Senator Thom Tillis, who isn't seeking re-election in North Carolina after issuing this warning on President Trump's tax bill.
I'm telling the president that you have been misinformed. You supporting the Senate mark will hurt people who are eligible and qualified for Medicaid.
And it's take two for Michael Waltz, forced out as President Trump's national security advisor after the Signalgate scandal. Waltz back on Capitol Hill today for his confirmation hearing to become the next ambassador to the UN. But we begin this evening with Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who joins us live from Pittsburgh today, traveling with the president, who's there to talk about AI and energy investments. Tyler, what can you tell us?
Yeah, hey, Joe. So we're here on the sidelines of the Pennsylvania Energy and Innovation Summit, and we heard President Trump take the stage a short time ago and tout more than $92 billion worth of private investment. And the money is going towards things like data centers and infrastructure upgrades, but also training and apprenticeships in a bid to try to bolster the AI workforce. Because that's one of the big questions going forward here is how can the U.S. really maintain an edge when it comes to China? And it's something that President Trump honed in on and also said that we could expect future investments in the weeks to come. We are reporting that President Trump is expected to make a major AI announcement some point next week, according to people familiar with the matter. Now, something that's been discussed here on the ground is this surging demand in energy to meet artificial intelligence and keep powering the innovation to go forward. And I actually had the chance to catch up with the head of the American Petroleum Institute, Mike Summers, earlier today, who said that the U.S. is playing catch up.
We're never going to speed up enough to meet the surging demand that we know is coming. The AI revolution really just started about 2 years ago, and we're already seeing an incredible amount of demand on the power grid. We need to catch up, and that means more energy production here in the United States.
The administration is very focused on its deregulation agenda. It's something that I asked the Energy Secretary Christopher Wright about earlier today. He said that he thinks they can meet the demand, but that it's going to be a challenge to do so. This is about supply, demand, and also the costs. And I should say, Joe and Kaylee, that we heard from many industry leaders that they're actually looking for tariff carve-outs when it comes to their companies and what does appear to be some rising prices when it comes to how they are able to ship their energy to these data centers to power artificial intelligence. Joe and Kaylee, the Energy Secretary told me not to expect anything. There doesn't appear to be any special carve-outs in the pipeline for the industry.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall in Pittsburgh. Thank you so much. And we'll be coming back to Tyler later this hour as she sits down for an interview with Michael Intrator, the CEO of CoreWeave, who's planning to build a $6 billion AI data center in Pennsylvania. Now on Capitol Hill, the Senate is preparing this evening to take the first procedural steps to pass President Trump's $9 billion rescissions package, with the White House agreeing to remove some elements to win over key Republican holdouts. Here's the Senate Majority Leader John Thune on that earlier this afternoon.
There was a lot of interest among our members in doing something on the PEPFAR issue. And so that's reflected in the substitute. And we hope that if we can get this across the finish line in the Senate, that the House would accept that one small modification that ends up making the package still about a $9 billion rescissions package.
And joining us now live from Capitol Hill here on Bloomberg TV and radio for more is Republican Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina, who's a member of both the Senate Finance and Banking Committees, among others. Senator, thank you so much for joining us here on Balance of Power. Now that the PEPFAR cuts are out, does this rescissions package have your hard yes vote? Will it have enough votes to pass in final passage?
Yeah, I'd actually indicated that I was a lean yes before the amendment came out. Look, the main thing that's important about this bill is to make sure that the questions from members who have not yet decided on how they're going to vote get answered, or there are commitments that this broad authority that they're providing the administration to make cuts is not going to surprise them in the future. The reason that's important is this is it's a $9 billion bill. I hate to dismiss the concept of $9 billion, but there's a promise of tens of billions of dollars in rescissions that I hope that we're voting on in the future as a result of some of the government efficiency efforts. And we do not want to erode the support for future rescissions packages by not getting this small one right. It's a great test case, and that's why I incline to support it.
Apparently is a test case for some Democrats as well, Senator. To your point, in the grand scheme, $9 billion is a drop in the bucket, and a lot of Democrats say you will lose support from any members across the aisle when it comes to crafting a budget for the new fiscal year. Doesn't clawing back congressionally approved funding send the message to Democrats that they can't trust a deal if there is one on spending?
I think it's a fair argument, which is exactly why the advisors, the president's advisors on where these cuts hit, really should fit in the category of fraud or waste or abuse. If you use this with the general support from Republicans to rescind measures that may have been used to negotiate a budget deal in the past, then why on earth would they trust us in the future? So I think getting it right is very important. What I'm talking about are future rescissions votes that I hope that are sent to us and we process like the one before us today. What you're talking about is basic trust, and if we negotiate an appropriate year-end appropriations deal, that the Democrats feel like the spirit of that negotiation is not going to be undone with a future rescission. I think that'd be a huge mistake. I can't imagine the president would intuitively want to do it. Hopefully none of his advisors would encourage him that that's a good idea. It's a bad idea.
Well, as it may take Democratic cooperation to get appropriations passed, it also will take Democratic cooperation to get crypto legislation through both chambers. As I'm sure you well know, Senator, the House has dubbed it Crypto Week, and yet it seems they're struggling to advance a package of bills. One that would be the Genius Act that already passed your chamber, another being the Clarity Act, market structure legislation. It seems that the holdouts who did not vote for this procedural advancement are concerned that they cannot make changes to the Genius Act that you and your colleagues passed. If they do so, would it be able to pass the Senate once again? Would you do anything if they're able to pass the Clarity Act with it, or would that require change as well?
My Republican colleagues in the House need to hear this. I was one of the 4 members that teamed up with 4 Democrats to pass Senate Bill 2155, which was regulatory tailoring for small and regional banks. We had an agreement that that bill wasn't going to change, and we carried it all the way through over the objections of Sherrod Brown, the chair, and Elizabeth Warren on the Banking Committee. If our House members send an amendment bill back to us that doesn't fit or isn't already pre-conferenced with the Democrats who helped us pass that bill out, they can expect that that bill will never see the light of day. So I respect that they may want to make some changes, but they may want to send that in a separate vehicle to us and go ahead and send the Genius Act to the president's desk. If they don't, then they may own the responsibility for not getting that done. And it's a great start, but we've got a lot of work to do.
Of course, Senator, you also found yourself on the same side as many Democrats in voting against the president's so-called big, beautiful bill, and it led to a major decision for you to decide to bring your Senate career to a close here. President Trump talked about your vote here. If you didn't hear what he said, let's bring it to our listeners and viewers here on Bloomberg.
Tillis, I guess, was a no, right? He was a no. And they said he was brave. He said no to the president, but he resigned the following morning. So anyway, that was terrible, I thought.
Senator, weigh in on that as you please. That was from yesterday at the White House, by the way. Have you talked to President Trump? Has he called you, or have you called him since that happened?
We haven't spoken since then, but the president knew that night before, number one, that I was a no, because I told him personally, and number two, I told him now would be a good time to start looking for my replacement. And it was after that the president posted that he'd be seeking interviews for my replacement. But I was pretty clear with the president, unless he forgot that discussion the night before. I noticed he was trying to check to see if I voted no, but I was pretty clear I was going to be a no. The reason I was a no, and the reason it was so difficult for me, is the vast majority of the bill I supported. I was here to vote for jobs and tax cuts, and I wanted that back in place. There were a number of provisions. The House bill for the Medicaid mark was fine, but here's my challenge to anyone. We have fully released our analysis of the hit of the Medicaid bill that the president signed on July 4th. I would love nothing more than somebody to do the work to discredit the analysis. This isn't words, this is math. We did the math. We have 3 independent assessments that came to the same conclusion. This is going to be very difficult for states like North Carolina and many others to absorb. We already have a member today, I think it was Josh Hawley, who's filing a bill to try and fix the Medicaid damage that he voted on last week. I decided that what we ought to do is go back to the House mark. Great work requirements, the $800 billion in savings, waste, fraud, and abuse. The whole difference between me and the president came down to something that somebody in the White House suggested that the Senate put in the bill that saved $200 billion more, but it's going to cost this country and potentially this party elections next year and the coming years as it gets implemented. It just seemed like it wasn't very well thought out, and I think the president was given bad advice to put it into the bill.
Well, I wonder, Senator, if we should expect there to be more differences between you and President Trump, or the majority leader for that matter. As you said when you decided not to seek re-election, that it gives you the freedom to call balls and strikes. Are you still a reliable Republican yes vote for any legislative effort that happens from here?
I need to be very clear. I am a transaction person. What I wanted to make clear was that if anybody thought that my decisions are driven by whether or not I can get reelected or get an endorsement, I wanted to take that off the table. That's not how I operate. I am a trained management consultant who looks at everything that we do here through the lens of execution. Will this work? Can the states absorb the change? Is it in the best interest of our country and our party, in that order? And in my judgment, it wasn't. Every future transaction will not be influenced by this Medicaid vote. Hopefully we can fix a lot of the damage that occurred by rushing it through for a 4th of July signature. But I'm on to the next transaction, and I will do everything I can to try and make the defects in that bill work. Or, like I said, the U.S. government has probably access to more research capability than anyone else. Don't tell me that my estimates are wrong because you believe they're wrong. We've provided all this information, the methodology for the impact, disprove it. I'd love nothing more than to know that I was wrong, because that means I don't have a lot of work to do to get North Carolina ready to potentially take 663,000 people off of Medicaid in a couple of years.
Sure. Well, Senator, a lot of people think that makes you one of the more brave members of the Senate right now. We had Democrats calling this a profile in courage. And I wonder, with that said, what that means when President Trump reaches out, when John Thune reaches out. Will this be the same conversation when they need your support for legislation? How does this change your view?
The only thing that I've tried to encourage the president, I've seen several look, the president of the United States has a difficult job. He can't possibly be expected to be an expert in any area. What I'm trying to advise him on is that he has people advising him who pretend like they're him when he's not in the office, and sometimes are not thinking through policy. I happen to have the rare combination of execution discipline with Fortune 500 companies and 20 years in legislative service, including Speaker of the House. So I've been able to understand the execution maybe a little bit better than other people, certainly people who have never been elected and who have never had a political role before, who are advising the president. I'm just simply saying, take my advice for what it's worth, but it may help you look around a few corners, and I think that that's where we'll ultimately end up on this Medicaid provision. And an otherwise big, beautiful, bountiful baby bill, whatever they want to call it. The fact of the matter is, most of the bill is good. I was talking about this one area that it ended up getting into, that over $200 billion, we ended up having that sort of a dust-up. It doesn't make sense to me, but again, I don't think it was the president's call. I think he had somebody who wanted to put their foot on the accelerator, and I respectfully disagree, whoever that was.
Yeah. Somehow we added another B to it. Senator, we'd love to have you come back to call some balls and strikes with us in the weeks and months ahead. We appreciate your time. Republican Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina, thank you. Coming up on Balance of Power, we'll continue our conversation on the Senate's agenda with Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota. First, today, President Trump announcing that Indonesia goods will face a 19% tariff. We'll talk about the strategy with Andrew Hale of the Heritage Foundation next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Be a judgment that the Chinese indigenous manufacturers already have an equivalent chip. So, if there's an equivalent chip, then the Nvidia H20 could be sold. One thing that we do not want is a digital Belt and Road springing up around the world because other countries or China are substituting for our American chip manufacturers.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent this morning here on Bloomberg TV and radio, responding to Nvidia's plans to resume sales of some AI chips to China after securing Washington's assurances that such shipments would get approved. Nvidia shares rallied on the news, closing about 4% higher today, a rare bright spot as most stocks and bonds fell during the session. For more, we turn now to Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who's joining us live from World Headquarters in New York. So obviously, Nvidia, large heavyweight, helps to drag at least the NASDAQ 100 higher, Romaine, but for the broader market wasn't as positive of a story.
Yeah, it was one of the few stocks that was even higher across the board, whether it was the NASDAQ or the S&P, but obviously it is the stock that matters most, and a 4% gain on the day, even for a company of its size and volatility, certain welcome. And Kaylee, it really is about three big stories today in markets that were all directly tied to trade policy or tariffs. Obviously, Nvidia and the idea that Nvidia, AMD, Broadcom, and some of these other chip makers are indeed going to be able to sell some of their more high-performance chips to China. Not the highest of the high, but high enough to make investors happy. And you saw big gains when it came to a lot of those chip stocks. On the other end, you had Boeing, of course, a potential reprieve, if you will, as Trump announced a potential trade deal with Indonesia that would actually include the potential purchase of several Boeing jets. Boeing shares, which were in the red prior to that announcement, spiked by about 1% before giving back some of those gains. And the third big story on the tariff and trade front was actually an economic story, and that was the CPI print that we got earlier this morning, a read on consumer inflation that did show some degree of an impact from those tariffs starting to finally show up in the official data. And the immediate reaction to that, you saw it in the bond market and you saw it in the options market, Kaylee and Joe, a repricing of expectations for Fed rate cuts. Now fewer rate cuts priced into this market as Treasury yields surge on the day. Long-term Treasury yields right now back at that 5% level, Joe, and on the shorter end of the curve, back around 4%.
Romaine, thank you. As always, Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick on the markets for us as we add the voice now for more insight into President Trump's tariff strategy of Andrew Hale, Senior Policy Analyst for Trade Policy at the Heritage Foundation. It's great to have you back, Andrew. You heard what Romaine was talking about. Indonesia is the headline today. 19% tariff on goods coming in, 0% tariff, the president says, on American goods entering the Indonesian market. Is this moving the needle for you? This is a far cry from China, India, or the EU.
Well, again, we'll have to see the framework document. We've not seen any documentation yet. Obviously, they've said 19% tariffs on them. In return, they're going to buy 15% of our energy plus 4.5% of our agricultural produce. But I think there's a bigger picture here that the administration's using this emergency legislation, IEPA, to implement these tariffs very immediately on countries, and then they get paused to give this time to negotiate these tariff deals. And they're really racing to a clock now because, of course, on the 31st of July, this month, just a few days away, the U.S. Court of Appeals of the Federal Circuit is going to convene en banc a total panel of all available judges, a 12-judge panel, to consider the cases where the administration has lost in the lower courts. So that decision will be crucial. That'll come a couple weeks off the 31st of July. So they're also racing to a deadline before they may not be able to use these IEPA tariffs, these tariffs on emergency legislation anymore. And that's going to be a defining moment.
Well, so Andrew, is there a chance that we see the implementation of these tariffs on August 1st and they only last for a couple weeks because courts say, no, that doesn't fly?
Well, I think that what will happen is we'll probably get another pause to facilitate more negotiations. I think there's several factors at play here. Just remember how we got the initial 90-day pause on the tariffs in April. That's because the S&P 500 experienced its worst drop since the pandemic, when, of course, President Trump announced those liberation tariffs back in April under emergency legislation. And since then, the index has recovered. But just bear in mind, I mean, we got that pause 9 days because the bond market nearly crashed. So I think there's some. I think the markets will be a moderating force, and also we've been getting some, as you've already mentioned, some bad news. We've had some further concerns. You know, U.S. manufacturing activity contracted for the fourth month straight in June, according to the Institute of Supply Management, as well as our soybean farmers are now advocating for a bailout due to the negative impacts of the ongoing trade disputes, particularly with China. And I'll just finish with this. Some of our soybean farmers have said that they're having to sell their soybeans below production value. So again, as more industries need bailouts, I think that would be further pressure to resolve these trade negotiations and get things back on track.
Well, Andrew, if we see another pause or a delay, as you suggest, does this become an administration that loses leverage every time it moves the date back?
Well, again, people are starting to expect it. I mean, like I said, let's be very clear. President Trump is very unpredictable. He likes to hold his cards very close to his chest, and he keeps us in suspense. I mean, like I said, recall recently on a Friday, he announced all trade negotiations with Canada ended because of their digital services tax. And by Sunday, the Canadian government had withdrawn the digital services tax. So this very, very robust level of negotiation that we've not really seen before, he does often get what he wants. And I actually think that he will actually implement stuff, but then, of course, he might have advisors who try to dial it back.
We have just a minute left, Andrew, but when you look at the CPI data today, that we're starting to see some passing through of tariff costs to consumers, does that give you concern? This is just the tariffs that are in place right now.
It does, because most of the Trump tariffs are being held in abeyance, as are the foreign retaliatory tariffs until the 1st of August, and then we may get another pause. But, of course, firms have been front-running the existing tariffs. So you will probably see in a few months, maybe probably 4 to 6, some further effects to fully show this. And if they actually implement the tariffs fully that they threatened, then we're likely to get a recession.
Well, and we know the president probably is not looking for that, even though he's looking for rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. A recession is something the Fed might feel compelled to respond to. Andrew Hale, Senior Policy Analyst for Trade Policy at the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for joining us. And we still have much more ahead here on Balance of Power as it's crypto week in the House, hitting a bit of a roadblock with the failure of a procedural vote today. The future of market structure legislation and stablecoin legislation, now a big question mark. We'll discuss whether they have a future with Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota ahead. But first, we'll turn back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for a conversation with Michael Intrator, CEO of CoreWeave, on his investment in a new AI data center. It's all coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
There's rapidly rising demand, and what we as the government need to do is enable private businesses to build the things they want to build and invest in the things they want to build. We're not going to do this building ourselves, but we're going to enable private businesses to do it.
Energy Secretary Chris Wright earlier today on Bloomberg TV and radio stressing President Trump's goal of unleashing domestic energy supply to meet the demand from artificial intelligence. It was part of his conversation with Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall at the Pennsylvania Energy and Innovation Summit in Pittsburgh. And Tyler is joining us live from there once again with Michael Intrator, the CEO of CoreWeave, a provider of AI computing power that's planning to invest as much as $6 billion to set up a data center in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Kaylee, thanks so much. And as you mentioned, I'm pleased to say I'm joined now by the CEO of CoreWeave, Michael Intrator. Mr. Intrator, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg. I want to start with why we're here in Pennsylvania. Today, you announced a $6 billion investment for a data center in this state. Just to give us some context here, how big is this project? How much acreage are we talking, for example?
So, first of all, thank you for having me. I think a better way of kind of thinking about the data centers, and CoreWeave has 32 data centers in its fleet, and this is a very large and meaningful one, one that we will use as our kind of anchor a regional resource for the Mid-Atlantic and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so it'll give us an opportunity to be able to serve an enormous amount of compute for artificial intelligence, either for model training or for inference, with very, very low latency to the population centers within Pennsylvania. It's an important data center for us. It's a meaningful location. It has a tremendous population within a very, very radius of low latency, which is important for all of our clients to be able to serve. As far as the data center itself, I would consider this to be kind of a medium to large size data center capable of supporting some of the largest, most advanced clusters of compute that are available in the world. And we're excited to be building here.
So part of the conversation that we're having here today at the summit is this growing demand for energy to power artificial intelligence. How are you planning to power this data center? Is there already some sort of deal in place?
Yeah, yes, there is, right? And so we've worked with our partners to ensure that there's the resources, the power, water, all the things that you need to be able to successfully build and deliver compute to your clients already in place. But the broader issue, really, that has echoed around this conference, and it has been an extraordinary conference, has really been about the need to be able to build and scale the energy infrastructure of the country, to be able to build and scale the computing infrastructure for artificial intelligence so that America can maintain its position as a leader in the space. And in many ways, the physical infrastructure for artificial intelligence, the compute, the clusters, that is going to define our ability to lead within this space.
So we've actually heard from the governor of this state, Josh Shapiro, who has raised concerns about electricity costs tied to AI data centers. This investment is coming here in the state. Yep. What's your level of concern? Are you thinking about how energy demand from AI could impact prices for American consumers?
Yeah, look, it is a valid concern. It's something that needs to be thought about in the most comprehensive way, right? And what I mean by that is, we are, as a consumer of and builder of data centers, we are absolutely willing to pay our fair share to make sure that we don't trigger runaway prices. On the same note, like, our ability to build this infrastructure is of importance to the country at large. It's important to national security. It's important to economic security. It's important to our ability to lead within what will be the next technology revolution over the next 30 years. And so, we need to be very thoughtful, and I think that policy makers raising that issue to ensure that the data centers, the consumers of compute are paying their fair share is a completely reasonable approach to take to this. It is necessary, but it's also necessary to understand that this is a absolutely critical infrastructure build that's going on and will continue to go on for many, many years.
Just before I let you go, I want to ask you about Nvidia, which today announced that it received assurances from the U.S. government it could sell its H20 chips in China. What would that mean for the CoreWeave's business model, considering you're so closely intertwined with them being one of your biggest investors?
So I always find it to be very fraught to try to anticipate what Jensen is thinking or what Nvidia is trying to do. I think it's best to ask them. Having said that, we don't sell resources to China, right? That's not within our business model. It's not within our purview. We really focus our data centers, the compute that we build, for clients that are in the U.S., that are in the Western Europe. Like, that's really where our business has been built. It's where we have been incredibly successful in scaling. It's where, we really intend to focus. And, I would imagine that Jensen has spent a lot of time thinking about, with the policymakers in the U.S., what is appropriate to be able to sell to China, what the scale is that's appropriate, and I'll leave that to them.
All right, we'd love to continue this conversation, but I know I have to let you go. The CEO of CoreWeave, Michael Intrator, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg. This has been a conversation on the sidelines of the Pennsylvania Energy and Innovation Summit. I'll toss it back to you guys.
Tyler, thank you so much for bringing us that important conversation. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall with us live from Pittsburgh. We thank you. Now, while Crypto Week is underway in Congress this week, the House to be specific, Donald Trump Jr. joined Bloomberg TV today. Had this to say about the prospect of digital asset legislation moving forward here in Washington.
Crypto is going to be the future of finance. People want to be in America. They want to invest in America. They want that stability. What they needed is some guide rails. They needed a framework in which they could work. To be able to have the legislation to create those guardrails, to be able to keep that industry. This is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and it should be based here in America. America should get the tax benefits of all of that. They should have the innovation, the growth. That's strategic thinking, and so I'm super excited about that bill because I think it's going to really make sure that America is the home of crypto and blockchain technology for the future.
For more on the future of crypto here in Washington, specifically on Capitol Hill, we're joined on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio by Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota, who's a member of the Senate Finance Committee, Senate Banking Committee. Senator, great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. You were a no vote on the Genius Act in the Senate, and I wonder if you can speak to us about the sort of way Democrats are looking at this, the psychology around this, and whether your party will indulge this crypto industry with a set of regulations as long as Donald Trump and his family stand to benefit.
Well, first, thanks for inviting me back. I'm so glad to be with you all. And here's how I see this. We need to have a strong regulatory structure and framework to protect investors who are investing in digital assets. And I do not think that either the Clarity Act or the Genius Act that we talked about we've talked about here in the Senate provide either of those things. And first, there are massive loopholes that allow crypto issuers and exchanges to get around the basic market protections that investors expect in the best markets, best financial markets in the world here in the United States. But to the point that you're raising, neither of these bills do anything to stop Donald Trump or his family from profiting, using the White House, using the Oval Office to profit on their family business interests in crypto. And to me, that is an absolute non-starter. I mean, literally, these meme coins that the Trump family is issuing is it's a bribery tool that allows foreign governments to invest, knowing full well that that's going to get them access to the President of the United States. And I think that is, at the very least, that is something that we should say absolutely not to. And these two bills are completely silent on that issue.
I'd like to ask you about perhaps a more pressing matter in the Senate, at least, Senator, as you're up against a Friday deadline, or your Republican colleagues are more specifically, to pass a rescissions package that the president wants of about $9 billion. Now that funding for PEPFAR is going to remain intact rather than being removed through this package. Is that an encouraging development to you? Does it make it more palatable?
Well, the way I look at this is a partisan action that Senate Republicans are taking to claw back bipartisan spending decisions that Congress voted on. And it's going to do great damage. I have been hearing thousands and thousands and thousands of Minnesotans telling me that they are strongly opposed to taking away funding for local public TV and radio stations. This is the way that people get information about weather emergencies. It's where their kids watch Sesame Street. It's where local news programs are broadcast in a place where there's a lot of loss of local news outlets in rural parts of our country. Not to mention what this rescissions package, so-called, is doing to basically step away from investments in foreign countries. You might say, oh, why does that matter to me in Mankato, Minnesota? Well, the reason it matters is it essentially is the United States saying, China, go ahead, take the leadership on economic development, on children around the world. It is a huge gift to China when we step away from those foreign investments.
Well, of course, Senator, there's already a huge lack of trust, I think we can all say openly, between Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill. If this passes, looks like it might, have Republicans lost Democrats as partners in budgeting the next fiscal year? Does this guarantee a government shutdown?
Well, I mean, what I would just say is that how could Democrats in good, faith negotiate on a bipartisan budget package when we know that the Republicans are just going to turn around and, using only their partisan votes, take back the parts of that bill that they don't like? It is a big problem, and it is a real threat to what the Constitution gives to Congress, which is our right to be able to make decisions about how we think public taxpayer dollars should be invested, and basically handing those decisions over to the president. And one thing I think my Republican colleagues should think really hard about is this is not going to be the last time that Russell Vought and Donald Trump do this. In fact, there's lots of discussion about even another partisan process to take back funding, even in August. So if they pass this now, they're going to be dealing with this over and over and over again, and it erodes and undermines their authority as members of Congress with the power of the purse.
Well, understood, Senator, that you think that this is a problem, but to Joe's point, is it a problem worth risking a government shutdown over? Would a government shutdown not make it easier potentially for the administration to continue its efforts to trim back parts of the federal government?
Well, understand, if the Republicans in Congress and the United States Senate want Democratic votes to pass their bills, and they need to come and negotiate with us, and we are more than ready to do that. But they should not take us for granted, and we are not going to just go along with anything that they do. And if that were to come to, we get to the end of September and we're talking about what damage is going to be done to my constituents in Minnesota and people all over the country by their partisan bills, for sure we're going to stand up to that, and we're going to make the case and make the argument.
One of the big concerns that Democrats expressed, and some Republicans, we talked to Thom Tillis a little while ago before you joined us this hour, Senator, were changes to Medicaid. There were concerns about rural hospitals, rural nursing homes closing down, and that spawned a relief fund that I believe came in at $50 billion in the president's so-called big, beautiful bill. Is that going to be enough, or do you need to do more work to protect these hospitals and nursing homes?
Well, I cannot imagine that the damage that was done to rural hospitals by this so-called big, beautiful bill it's going to ripple through rural economies. And I've spoken to Minnesota hospitals who've told me that if this comes to pass, it's not going to be a question of if they close. It's only a question of when they close. And think about the impact that this has on rural communities. It's certainly the loss of those hospital beds and outpatient treatment, but it is also the loss of jobs and a sense of community stability. So there's no way that a relief fund is going to be able to undo the damage that was done to rural hospitals by this big, beautiful bill. There's just no way.
All right, Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota joining us live from Capitol Hill. Thank you so much. And coming up, we'll continue our conversation on the Senate's plan to tackle President Trump's rescissions package when we assemble our political panel. Next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. Former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was back on Capitol Hill today for his Senate confirmation hearing to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. While much of the hearing focused on foreign policy, including China's growing global influence, lawmakers also grilled Waltz on his involvement in Signalgate.
We both know Signal is not a secure way to convey classified information. And I was hoping to hear from you that you had some sense of regret over sharing what was very sensitive, timely information about a military strike on a commercially available app that's not, as we both know, the appropriate way to share such critical information.
Again, Senator, I think where we have a fundamental disagreement is there was no classified information on that chat.
That was Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware questioning Waltz today, who accidentally added a reporter to an encrypted chat, a signal group that included detailed discussions on an attack on Yemen's Houthi militants. The incident at the time cost Waltz his job as national security advisor. That was back in May. Now, the Pentagon is currently investigating Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's role in this incident. And joining us now with their reaction to this story and more, this evening's political panel. Adam Hodge is back, managing director at Bully Pulpit International, our Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist John Seaton, founding partner, CEO, Echo Canyon Consulting. Gentlemen, great to have you both here. What do you make of this, Adam? A couple months ago when this happened, it was the biggest story, the biggest scandal in the political world. We thought multiple cabinet officials could end up losing their jobs over this. It was a turning point, they said, for the Trump campaign, a careless moment at best. Democrats were going to take out the hammer when this hearing took place. They didn't really today. Is it time that solves all scandals or something more going on here?
No, I mean, I thought that Cory Booker did a pretty effective job at pushing him to clearly state that he was wrong and demand accountability. I mean, the national security advisor using Signal to discuss sensitive, clearly classified information, regardless of what he said today, is a grave violation of America's national security. And so Democrats did their best to try to hammer him on it. I think the question that they put to him was very simple. Can't you just own up to the mistakes that you made? Clearly, it cost you your job. You got fired. So just own up to it. If you want this next job, own up to the mistakes. And he failed to do that today.
Well, as some senators were busy in testimony or hearing testimony from Mike Waltz, there was also work happening in the Senate actively to try to whip the votes for the president's rescissions bill that now has spending cuts for PEPFAR, which were deeply controversial, removed from it. It's something we got the reaction of Republican Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina from earlier this hour here on Balance of Power.
I'd actually indicated that I was a lean yes before the amendment came out. Look, the main thing that's important about this bill is to make sure that the questions from members who have not yet decided on how they're going to vote get answered, or there are commitments that this broad authority that they're providing the administration to make cuts is not going to surprise them in the future.
So, John, I do wonder if you think ultimately that this will be able to pass the Senate and how critical it is that it does, because if they can't pass this relatively small rescissions package, are they going to be able to pass any other one?
I expect it'll pass. I mean, I do think that, generally speaking, Republicans in Congress, in the Senate, are going to push for their priorities. But at the end of the day, they are going to not want to be the reason that this doesn't ultimately pass. And to your point, to ensure more cuts in the future, this is a good test case. So I do think that there's going to be continued negotiations and continued work with the House and with the White House. But ultimately, I do think that they'll have the votes to get it passed.
This is risky business, Adam. What will be Democrats' message, if anything other than a middle finger, when it comes time to write a budget for next year, if this actually becomes law?
I think there are three things that Democrats should focus on. One, like the cuts to things like PEPFAR, other programs that would be part of the package. Yeah. I mean, it risks actual lives. People could lose their life over the loss of funding. We've seen that with the USAID cuts that they've already been put in place. Two, it just weakens our commitment, our support with key countries and allies around the world. People are questioning whether the U.S. is a reliable partner. But third, it also creates an opening for China to come in and step in where we are, potentially walking away. And so I know the cuts of PEPFAR may be saved for now. The threat clearly has been, and Russell Vought has talked about further cuts to all the foreign aid and other assistance. And it's not just that it is bad for people's lives, but it actually hurts America's standing in the world, and I think it's a huge problem.
Well, and of course, votes like this one could have implications for the midterms as we consider the consequences for the electorate and what the map ultimately looks like. And we learned today at least, that President Trump would like the map to look different in Texas, talking about how redistricting could mean Republicans could net seats there. This is what he said earlier today.
5, I think we get 5. And there could be some other states. We're going to get another 3 or 4 or 5 in addition. Texas would be the biggest one, and that'll be fine. Just a very simple redrawing. We pick up 5 seats. But we have a couple of other states where we'll pick up seats also.
John, I know your firm has some business in Texas, so would love for you to weigh in on this one. As we know, this redistricting issue will be part of the special session that begins in Texas this coming Monday. What would the potential ramification be if indeed they do change the map? Could Democrats not then just go and look at maps in all of those blue states and try to figure out how they can pick up 5 seats in return?
They certainly could do that. And yeah, look, I do think that it's already a very good map in Texas, but there are a couple of districts, especially I'd look in South Texas and the 34th Congressional District and the 28th Congressional District, where a few slight modifications could add Republicans in. I'm not sure if they'll get to 5 additional seats, but I do think that there's some opportunities there. And it'll be also very interesting to see how Democrats in the legislature respond. As you may recall, earlier this decade, they kind of boycotted a special session, left the state to prevent a quorum. They eventually came back, but it could be some interesting political theater over the next week.
Interesting polling from Tony Fabrizio's group when you consider the midterms here, Adam. A generic ballot, 28 battleground House seats, including 15 where Republicans won in 2024. If you look at the outcome from these districts, even in the last election, the generic Republican now is down 3 points among all registered voters. How did Democrats capitalize on it?
Well, first, what you're seeing in Texas is what you do when your ideas suck, when they really can't win over the voters. Right? You try to rig the map in your favor, and I think it's a stain in our democracy. It's bad for politics.
Is it enough to turn around numbers like this?
I think that the bills that they put forward so far, coupled with the tariff and trade policy, which is clearly, as we saw today, with the CPI print, denting America's ability and hurting the pocketbooks of American families. It creates more uncertainty, more chaos, and ultimately that is not helpful to Republicans' chances of winning the House. So I think that is a real risk, and they're going to try whatever they can to rig the map. Texas, as John was saying, it's not new. They did it in North Carolina. And there's always a chance that Democrats do the same thing in California and other states. Again, all told, I think it's not good for our democracy to have this ping-ponging and picking maps and have politicians picking their voters.
John, we just have 30 seconds left, but does the Fabrizio poll make you nervous?
I think it's very early. A lot can change, as we've learned over the next 17 months between now and Election Day. And so, sure, I think Republicans, traditionally the party that controls the White House, does tend to struggle in midterm elections. But I do think that Republican voters are still strongly supportive of the president and are motivated to turn out and vote in 2026. So it's going to be a very competitive election. Of course, I wouldn't say it's time to panic just yet.
John Seaton, Adam Hodge, great conversation. We thank you both for being part of our panel today. Also, a programming note, make sure to tune into this week's brand new episode of Bullish with Sonali Bostick, which is all about Wall Street and their focus on home ownership. It airs tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Bloomberg Television. Stream at 8 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Originals. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.